The moment I saw the unsigned termination resolution sitting on the conference table, my name typed neatly at the top, the air in the boardroom went thin. Not stale, not cold, thin. Like someone had cracked a window in space and every molecule of oxygen was being pulled out around me. I didn't even sit down. I couldn't. My legs were shaking too hard. They thought they were being clever, leaving the document half-tucked under a stack of quarterly revenue reports. As if I wouldn't recognize the formatting I'd used for a decade. As if I wouldn't notice the missing signatures page, the blank line where the effective date should go. As if I wouldn't understand immediately that someone planned to sign it when I wasn't in the room. If you've ever built something from nothing, paid payroll off your personal credit card, slept on office couches, pitched until your voice scraped, only to see your own name typed on a termination document you never knew existed, then you understand why my throat closed and my vision blurred at the edges. Stay with me, because what happened next is the reason I tell this. I reached for the paper, fingertips brushing the smooth, heavy linen stock we only used for board actions. The smell of burnt coffee lingered from the earlier meeting, mixing with the faint citrus of the cleaning crew's spray. The building's HVAC clicked on overhead, a low, rattling hum that made the silence feel accusatory. The resolution was simple, sterile. Removal of Chief Executive Officer. No cause listed. No accompanying performance review. No preceding warnings. Just a line, pending approval of majority. That majority meant 5 board members, 2 of whom had been acting strangely for weeks. I felt that drop in my stomach, the same feeling I'd had 3 nights earlier when I overheard a fragment of a whispered conversation outside my office door. A man's voice, low and confident. "She won't fight it, trust me." Then a soft laugh I recognized too well. I should have confronted them then, but a founder learns to second-guess her instincts, especially a Black woman founder, especially after years of being told she's protective, intense, overly invested. My own company had trained me not to trust myself. I scanned the rest of the document, my pulse thudding in my ears. There, at the bottom, 2 initials lightly penciled in. Not signatures, just marks, familiar handwriting. Board member Ellis with his habit of looping his E like an ampersand. And beside his, a faint indentation like someone pressed a pen into the paper without writing. That would be Ramirez. She always hesitated before signing anything, tapping the tip of her pen first. So it was them. The same 2 who'd insisted we slow walk the Kaiser expansion. The same 2 who'd pushed for a valuation that made no sense. The same 2 who had suddenly developed reservations about our Series B lead. My chest tightened, not fear, not yet, recognition. They weren't planning a pivot, they were planning a sale. And not just any sale, a hostile acquisition, cheap, quiet, clean. I steadied myself using the back of a chair, the vinyl cool under my palm, and forced a slow breath. If they were moving this fast, it meant one thing. They believed I didn't have the evidence. They believed I didn't know about their hidden ties to the competitor circling us like a vulture. But I did. And what I found next made my hands tremble so hard, I nearly dropped the resolution. Type, continue for next part. You said. Continue. Corporate revenge, Black Lady said. The memory hit me before I even realized I was slipping into it. The first time I met Ellis and Ramirez, back when I was still naive enough to believe board members were mentors rather than liabilities. It was 7 years ago, in a boutique conference room at a healthcare innovation summit in San Diego, the kind with spotless glass walls and pretentious minimalist furniture that squeaked when you sat down. I remember smoothing the wrinkles out of my blazer, trying to ignore the smell of overbrewed hotel coffee seeping in from the hallway. Ellis approached first. Crisp navy suit, polished shoes, that expensive-smelling cologne men wear when they want you to notice their confidence before you notice anything else. "Dr. Lawson," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard good things, very good things." His grip was warm, firm, rehearsed, the smile of a man accustomed to being welcomed. Ramirez hovered a step behind him, chic black dress, tablet in hand, her expression a perfect neutrality that made you want to impress her. "Your predictive analytics model," she said, her voice smooth but clipped. It's unusually precise for hospital datasets. That's not easy. I chuckled nervously. It's not easy at all. Took 3 years to get the anomaly detection stable. You built the early version alone, she asked. I built everything alone back then. She nodded once, a small flicker of what I thought was respect. In retrospect, maybe it was calculation. The three of us sat at a small round table, the vinyl seats sticky against the back of my legs despite the overpowered AC humming above us. They asked smart questions, pointed ones. Funding runway, clinical validation, regulatory compliance pathways. I was 37 then, still riding the high of my first hospital pilot, and their interest felt like validation. Needed validation. I believe in your vision, Ellis said, leaning forward with the kind of intensity that could warm a room. And I believe we could help you accelerate it. You've got something rare, Ramirez added. A product that solves a real problem and a founder who actually understands the problem. Her eyes held mine longer than necessary, and I mistook that for allegiance. Even then, there were hints. A glance they exchanged when I mentioned wanting to keep majority control. The way Ellis asked, almost casually, and you're comfortable leading the sales strategy yourself, in a tone that wasn't questioning my experience so much as my existence. But I chalked it up to nerves, to the imposter syndrome every woman founder I knew carried like a second pulse. When they handed me their business cards, thick, embossed, unnecessarily heavy, I felt something close to gratitude. I didn't know that someday I'd hold a very different set of documents in my hands, ones they never meant for me to see. I look forward to working together, I said that day, and I meant it. I believe you'll build something extraordinary, Ellis replied. I believed him. I whisper sometimes when the memory resurfaces. Back then, I thought trust was the foundation of partnership. Turns out, trust was the first weapon they sharpened. And believing him, was my first mistake. The first real cracks started small, hairline fractures in places only a founder paying too much attention would notice. But pressure makes anything break, and the pressure that year was relentless. Our Series B prep had me living on cold brew and adrenaline, my apartment littered with half-written pitch decks and abandoned takeout containers. I barely slept. I barely breathed. Maybe that's why I missed the early signs. One morning, our finance director forwarded an email chain she thought I should see. The phrasing alone made my stomach twist. I opened it while standing in the kitchen area of the office, the faint smell of someone's microwaved leftovers lingering in the air. The fluorescent lights flickered the way they always did when the HVAC kicked in, a soft rattle overhead. There, buried in a thread between Ellis and two of our clinical partners, was a line that made the back of my neck prickle. We're evaluating leadership options to support long-term stability. Leadership options. For weeks, they'd told me everything was fine. I walked straight to Ellis's office, the carpet swallowing the sound of my steps. Can we talk about the email? I asked, keeping my voice steady even though my pulse thudded in my throat. He didn't look up from his laptop. Which email? The one where you're evaluating leadership options. Finally, he raised his eyes, expression warm in a way that felt performative. Ah, that. Alexis, you're reading too much into it. I'm reading what you wrote. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. It was taken out of context. Investors ask questions, we respond, nothing more. That's not what it sounded like. You're being a bit emotional about this, don't you think? There it was, that quiet, practiced dismissal I'd heard from 100 men in 100 rooms. It still hit hard. I'm being accurate, I said. He smiled, soft, patronizing. Trust me, it's nothing. That phrase, trust me. I walked out before I said something I'd regret, but the unease pooled low in my stomach, thick and heavy. 2 weeks later, the second red flag arrived wrapped in a spreadsheet. Our burn rate projection had a sudden, unexplained spike. I flagged it during operations review. We didn't approve new hires, I said. Ramirez tapped her pen against the table twice, her tell when she was nervous. They're contractors, she replied. Temporary support for the Kaiser integration. We already staffed Kaiser. This is supplemental. Supplemental to what? I asked. She held my gaze just a second too long. You're overthinking. Overthinking, emotional, distracted. Funny how the vocabulary of betrayal always echoes the same tone. Still, I tried to brush away the doubts. I told myself I was tired. That scaling a health tech company meant friction, that I didn't need to see conspiracy in every spreadsheet and email. But then came the third sign, the one I couldn't rationalize away. A Friday afternoon Slack message from our head of analytics. Did you approve access for Ramirez to the raw clinical dataset? She's listed as admin now. Admin, on the dataset we guarded with our lives, the dataset we built our reputation on, the dataset that defined us. I felt the bottom drop out. No, I typed back. I didn't approve that. I stared at the message until the screen blurred, my hands trembling over the keyboard. Because if Ramirez had admin access, she wasn't just observing. She was preparing something. And I had no idea how deep it went. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that whatever Ellis and Ramirez were planning wasn't improvised. It was engineered. None of it was sloppy. None of it accidental. Every breadcrumb they'd left for me to find had been carefully placed in places they assumed I'd never look. It started with the access logs. I remember sitting in my darkened office late one night, the only light coming from the glow of my monitor and the faint streetlights filtering through the blinds. Someone had left a mug of stale coffee near the edge of my desk earlier. The bitter smell blended with the faint scent of printer toner hanging in the room. My fingers hovered over the trackpad as I pulled up the administrative audit trail, a place most board members would never think I still checked personally. There it was, Ramirez's elevated access timestamped well past business hours. Not once, not twice, 3 nights in a row, each one paired with exported query reports on our clinical outcomes model, the proprietary engine that separated us from every competitor. The logs were too clean, too intentional, almost rehearsed. My pulse grew sharp, steady, aggressive. A dull ringing crept in around the edges of my hearing as I clicked into the export metadata. And there, buried deep, was a link path that shouldn't have existed, a dataset fork created by an admin account I didn't recognize, a fork that mirrored our entire model in pristine detail. Someone had duplicated us. My throat tightened. My breath felt shallow. I pushed my chair back, heart hammering against my ribs so hard it actually hurt. I forced myself to stand, pacing the length of my office as I tried to process what I was seeing. When I finally sat again, my hands trembled so badly I had to brace my wrists against the desk just to control the cursor. I reopened the dataset fork. Its access history was masked, poorly, a manual obfuscation. Someone had wiped the admin ID and replaced it with placeholder text, but they hadn't touched the location metadata. The export had been transferred through a VPN endpoint associated with a firm I knew too well, Medaxis. Our biggest competitor. The same company that had tried to acquire us 5 years earlier, right before we closed our seed round. The same company that had been circling us again over the past quarter, offering low-ball acquisition feelers under the guise of strategic alignment. I clicked into the folder structure again, and that's when I found the second piece of evidence, the one that made the room tilt. An internal memo, not from our company, from theirs. Not supposed to be here, not supposed to be anywhere near our servers. It was a draft proposal outlining strategic absorption of forecasting IP from an unnamed acquisition target. But the language, the phrasing, the clinical performance milestones. It was my language, my milestones, my work copied word for word into a competitor's acquisition planning document. And at the bottom, under the approval section, were 2 sets of initials, ER, LR. Ellis, Ramirez. The metallic taste hit the back of my mouth, so fast it made me swallow hard. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was betrayal with a signature. My phone buzzed on the desk, the vibration loud in the tense silence. A text from an unknown number. Board meeting moved to Monday. Mandatory. I stared at the screen, nausea creeping up my throat. Monday, they were accelerating their timeline. They thought I didn't know. They thought I wouldn't see. They thought I would walk into that boardroom blind. I closed my eyes, fingers curling into fists against my thighs as the truth settled like a stone in my chest. They weren't just planning to fire me. They were planning to sell my life's work out from under me. And now I had proof. The weekend before that Monday board meeting felt like a long, airless tunnel I couldn't climb out of. I barely left the office. The building was silent except for the low hum of the ventilation system and the occasional elevator groan from some late-night janitorial run. I kept telling myself I'd go home, shower, sleep. But every time I stood up, the fear of missing something pulled me right back into my chair. By Saturday evening, I still hadn't eaten anything substantial. A half-eaten protein bar sat next to my keyboard, stale and waxy. My eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets, logs, and screenshots until the lines blurred. I told myself I was assembling a case, but really, I was convincing myself I wasn't losing my mind. Around what must have been late afternoon, judging only by the faint gold light seeping through the blinds, I finally called outside counsel. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. He picked up on the second ring. "Alexis, what's going on?" "I need your help," I said, forcing the words out. "I found evidence that 2 board members have been collaborating with Medaxis, exported datasets, internal docs that shouldn't exist on our servers. A termination vote is coming on Monday." A pause, then, "Okay, talk me through it." "There's a forked dataset matching our predictive outcomes model, metadata pointing to a Medaxis VPN endpoint. And there's a proposal draft using our language. Their initials are on it. Do you have the full chain of custody, timestamps, access logs?" "Yes." "And proof the documents originated on their systems, not planted?" I hesitated. "I can infer it." "That's not proof." I swallowed hard. "It's strong enough. They're selling the company out from under me." He sighed, the kind of tired exhale lawyers give when they're weighing liability. "Alexis, listen carefully. If you accuse 2 board members without airtight evidence, you could be removed for cause. If you escalate too soon, they'll say you're unstable. You know how these narratives get built. They're stealing my company." "I hear you, but legally, you need more than inference, you need provenance." "So what do I do?" He didn't answer for a moment. Then, "If you're right and they're planning something Monday, you need to keep your head down. Do nothing until you have more." Doing nothing is how they win. Doing something too early is how they bury you. His voice softened. "I'm on your side, but right now, if you make a move, they'll erase everything." I pressed a hand to my forehead. The room swayed. Then what am I supposed to do? Wait and hope they slip. Hope, that word made something inside me curl and snap. I hung up, feeling more alone than before. The fear sat heavy in my chest, thick as wet concrete. I tried to stand and nearly stumbled. My body was giving out before my will did. That night my sister called. "Lex, you sound awful. Have you slept?" "I'm fine," I lied. "You don't sound fine." "It's just work." A pause. "You're scaring me." I closed my eyes, swallowing a sob I didn't have the energy to release. "I'll call you later." I didn't. By Sunday morning, I'd run out of tears, sleep, and options. I sat on the office floor, back pressed to the cold glass wall, hugging my knees to my chest. The city outside moved on without me, cars, people, an entire world oblivious to the fact that mine was caving in. I wanted someone to save me. The board, legal counsel, anyone. But no one was coming. And somewhere between the exhaustion and the panic, a quiet truth surfaced. Raw, sharp, undeniable. If I didn't fight this myself, I'd lose everything. I didn't even realize I had dozed off until my phone buzzed against the carpet beside me, vibrating loud in the quiet of the office. My neck ached from the awkward angle, and the glass wall behind me had left a cold patch against my spine. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was, just that I felt hollow, scraped out. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Riley. My breath caught. I hadn't spoken to her since she left to join that forensics startup in Palo Alto. We'd parted on good terms, but life moved fast and unevenly, and some friendships stretched thin even when they still mattered. Her message was short. Saw your email draft. You okay? My heart punched upward in my chest. I didn't remember sending her anything. Then I saw the timestamp. Hours ago, sometime between exhaustion and panic, I must have opened a blank message to her, typed a subject line, and never finished. I need help. That was all it said. I stared at it now, throat tight. She replied again. Lex, want me to come by? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat, like confirming the narrative Ellis and Ramirez were already crafting about me, emotional, unstable, overwhelmed. But I wasn't imagining what I'd found. I wasn't mistaken. I typed back, can you meet tonight, off the record? Her response came instantly. Location. I looked around my office. Papers everywhere, the stale smell of that abandoned mug, the anxiety soaked into the air itself. Not here. Not with the security system logging every badge swipe. Not with God knows who monitoring access. I typed, the old lab back entrance. On my way, bring coffee. Despite everything, a small laugh escaped my chest. Please. When I pushed myself off the floor, my legs trembled from hours of stillness and stress. I brushed off my slacks, straightened my blouse, and tried to gather the scattered pieces of my sanity before heading downstairs. The early evening air outside hit my lungs like something clean and startling. It smelled faintly of rain, concrete, and the distant food truck that always parked near the corner. Walking to the old lab was muscle memory. That's where the company started, just me in a cramped space that smelled like soldering equipment and burnt espresso, the paint peeling from the walls. The ownership plaque with my name still hung crooked near the entrance. I unlocked the side door and flicked on the light. The hum of the fluorescent bulbs felt too loud, almost judgmental. 5 minutes later, the door opened with a soft click. Riley stepped inside, hoodie jeans, hair pulled into a loose bun, a tray of coffees in one hand. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression shifting from concern to something sharper. You look like hell, she said gently. Thanks, I exhaled. I feel worse. She set the coffees on the counter. All right, she said, rolling up her sleeves. Who fucked you over? The question undid me. Not enough to cry, but enough to feel the burn behind my eyes, that stinging pressure of being seen after days of isolation. I swallowed hard. I need you to look at something, quietly. Show me. I opened my laptop, fingers stiff, and pulled up the logs. Then the dataset fork. Then the Medaxis memo. Each click felt like peeling skin, painful, raw. Riley leaned over my shoulder, her breath warm against the cold air of the lab. Jesus, she murmured. They didn't even try to hide this well. They obfuscated the admin ID, I said. Badly, she replied. This metadata's sloppy, amateur hour sloppy. That tells me they assumed no one on your side would ever check. I clenched my jaw. They thought I'd be gone before anyone noticed. Riley clicked into the memo, her eyes narrowing. These initials, ER and LR, that's Ellis and Ramirez. She stepped back, rubbing her forehead. Lex, this is a coordinated extraction. They're prepping your IP for transfer before the sale. A hostile one. I swallowed. Can I prove it? Not yet, she said, but we can. She opened a new folder on my desktop and began typing faster than I could follow, scripts, metadata pulls, a reconstruction of provenance chains. But listen carefully, she said, still typing. You're running out of time. They'll move on Monday. If you want to stop them, we need airtight evidence, not suspicion, not inference, proof. I watched her, a strange mix of dread and gratitude rising in my chest. Riley, I whispered, my voice fraying, am I doing the right thing? She paused her typing, turning to face me fully. Her expression softened. Lex, they're stealing your company, the one you bled for, the The one you built brick by brick while they sat in boardrooms pretending they understood what it cost you. I nodded slowly, my throat thick. She reached for her coffee. We're going to nail them, she said, but we do it right. For the first time in days, I felt the faintest flicker of something I hadn't dared touch. Hope. But it came with a pulse of fear, too. Because once we started this, there would be no turning back. The next 2 weeks became a study in duality. My face calm, my voice steady, my daily meetings routine, while inside I was a pulse of static and fire. Every morning I walked into the office with a measured smile, greeting Ellis and Ramirez, as though I hadn't uncovered the digital fingerprints of their betrayal. I said good morning in the same tone I'd always used, nodded politely in hallways, even sat beside them during a product review as if they weren't preparing to sever me from the company I built. If they noticed anything in my expression, they didn't show it. But Riley saw everything. We worked in the shadows, literally. Nights in the old lab with its flickering lights and peeling paint, cups of cold coffee piling up around us, the air thick with exhaustion and determination. The space smelled like dust, stale espresso, and that faint metallic tang of old wiring. Every sound felt amplified, the click of Riley's keyboard, the distant hum of a refrigeration unit, the quiet scratch of my pen as I took notes even though my hand shook through half the words. Look at this, Riley muttered one night, pulling up a chain of access logs. See how the dataset forks correspond with the metadata pulls from Medaxis's IP block. They're syncing, nightly. I felt my stomach twist. They're actively transferring. She zoomed in. And here, this token rotation, that's not an engineer, that's board-level override. Only 5 people have that access. 5, I whispered, and 2 of them are planning the sale. She nodded grimly. We're going to need to build a mirror environment, something that logs every movement they make from here forward. Quietly. If they try to accelerate the transfer, we catch it. A mirror environment, my pulse quickened. That's risky. Everything about this is risky. She slid her laptop toward me. But if you want to confront them publicly, you need indisputable proof. Something a judge, a regulatory board, even your most skeptical investor can't deny. I stared at the screen, the lines of code blurring for a moment. What if they notice? They won't, she said. We'll mask it as part of the Kaiser integration audit you're already preparing. Her confidence steadied me more than I expected. But those days weren't just technical maneuvers. They were psychological warfare. Because every morning after pulling an all-nighter with Riley, I'd walk into the office and see Ellis sipping an oat milk latte, smiling like he hadn't erased me from my own future. Or Ramirez reviewing board packets with that same poised expression that once reassured me. I'd sit through budget meetings where they whispered to each other, offering each other those tiny nods I used to think signaled alignment. Now I knew better. On Thursday of the second week, Ramirez knocked on my office door. Quick question, she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. I felt my jaw tighten but forced myself to lean back casually. Sure, I replied. She gestured to a document on her tablet. Is there a reason you're delaying the Kaiser audit summary? The board needs it before Monday. I kept my face smooth, still consolidating the model drift analysis. She studied me a little too long. Everything all right, you seem tense. I forced a laugh. Running a company is tense. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. When she left, the smell of her perfume lingered, a sharp citrus bite that hit something primal in me. Instinct, warning. I returned to the lab that night shaking, though I couldn't tell if it was exhaustion or rage. Maybe both. Riley studied my face. You're getting close to breaking, she said softly. I know. You can't, not yet. She pointed to the screen. We're almost done. Once we finish reconstructing the provenance chain, you'll have exactly what you need. What if it's not enough? She looked at me like she was seeing right through the fear I'd tried so hard to hide. It will be, trust me. That phrase, trust me, felt different coming from her. Solid, earned. I exhaled shakily. What's next? She tapped a folder. Tomorrow morning, we finalize the evidence packet, then we prepare for Monday. I stared at the glowing screen, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Tomorrow, I whispered. We do it tomorrow. The words felt like a promise. Or a countdown. I barely slept the night before the board meeting. I kept replaying the confrontation in my mind. How I'd start, when I'd reveal each piece, what expression Ellis might wear when he realized I wasn't walking in blind. By dawn, my nerves were a live wire running the length of my spine. I showered twice, changed outfits 3 times, and still felt like my skin wasn't sitting right on my bones. Riley met me in the office lobby just after opening, a to-go cup in her hand and a small recording device tucked discreetly in her pocket. "Breathe," she murmured. I am breathing. Hard to tell. We rode the elevator up in silence. The faint scent of someone's herbal tea lingered in the air, mixing with the metallic tang of old wiring. My hands were cold, but not shaking. Not anymore. Not today. When the elevator doors slid open onto the executive floor, I saw Ellis through the glass wall of the boardroom, leaning back, arms crossed, looking relaxed. Too relaxed. Ramirez was beside him, scrolling through her phone. A few other board members shuffled papers, chatting quietly. Not one of them suspected a thing. Not yet. I pushed open the door. The soft click echoed louder than it should have. "Alexis," Ellis said warmly, rising to greet me. "Glad you're here early. We've got a full agenda." "Do we?" I replied, sliding into my seat. I took the liberty of preparing some materials as well. He paused mid-step. "Of course," he said, masking the tension almost perfectly. "We can add additional items at the end." "We'll address them first," I said. The room went still. I opened my laptop, projecting the first screen to the display. A simple system access log, harmless looking to most, devastating to the right eyes. "Before we begin," I said, "I'd like clarity on this sequence of events." Ellis kept his face composed. "And what events are those?" I highlighted the first timestamp. "This administrative access. Ramirez, you elevated your permissions 3 weeks ago without notifying me." Ramirez blinked. That was for audit review." "Incorrect," I said calmly. "The audit didn't require admin-level access, so I ran a review of the logs." I clicked. The screen shifted to the dataset fork. Ellis leaned forward. "What exactly are you implying?" I kept my voice steady. "Nothing yet. I'm simply stating facts. This dataset was forked without authorization, and this fork was accessed through a Meddaxus-linked endpoint." A flicker barely visible crossed his face. "That's absurd. Anyone could spoof." He stopped when I clicked again. On the screen appeared the Meddaxus memo, word for word. My work embedded into their strategy document, and at the bottom, ER and LR. The room erupted. "What is this?" one board member demanded. "This is deeply concerning," another murmured. Ellis lifted a hand. "Everyone relax, this is clearly fabricated." I tilted my head. "Fabricated? That's an interesting choice of word." He turned to me sharply. "You're accusing us of treason against the company based on questionable metadata." Ramirez jumped in. "Alexis, you're emotional, this is why." "Finish that sentence," I said quietly, "and I promise you'll regret it." She swallowed her words. Ellis tried again, voice smooth. "Let's not escalate, if you're feeling overwhelmed." I slid a printed packet down the table toward him. "This is the full provenance chain, compiled independently." I nodded toward the door. It opened. Riley stepped inside, recording device in hand. Ellis went pale. "What is she doing here?" "She's here," I said, "because she authenticated every log, every export, every access trace. And she confirmed one more thing." Riley tapped the screen. A final file appeared, emails between Ellis, Ramirez, and a Meddaxus executive detailing the acquisition timeline. Gasps filled the room. Ellis stood abruptly, face drained. "You set me up." I shook my head. "No, Ellis, you set yourself up. I just handed you the shovel." His jaw clenched. eyes darting for exits, allies, explanations that no longer existed. And in that moment, watching his confidence collapse, I finally exhaled. The silence after Ellis's collapse wasn't relief. It was pressure, thick, suspended, waiting to break. For a moment no one moved, not even Ramirez. She sat frozen beside him, her fingers curled tight around her pen, knuckles white. Her eyes flicked from me to Riley, to the evidence glowing on the screen, and then back to the other board members as if someone might jump in and rescue her. No one did. Board Chair Patel separated his hands slowly, deliberately, as though the air between them had weight. "We need to address this immediately," he said, voice steady but hard. "Ellis, Ramirez, sit." Ellis didn't sit. He stayed half standing, jaw flexing, looking like a cornered animal searching for a crack in the wall. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Alexis fabricated those logs. She brought in outside help without authorization, Outside help who validated the provenance," Patel cut in. "This is a misunderstanding," Ramirez said, her voice breaking on the third syllable. This wasn't." "Don't," I whispered. "Please don't insult us further." A flush crept up her neck. She stared at the table. Patel turned to me. "We need the packets." I handed him the folder, 18 pages, each one heavy with the truth they'd hoped I'd never touch. He skimmed the first 3, then nodded to the general counsel sitting at the far end of the table. "Cross-verify." Counsel pulled the packet toward him, flipping through pages, his face tightening with each one. "These logs are legitimate. Metadata is intact. Email headers trace back exactly where she said." He exhaled sharply. "This is coordinated misconduct." The words hung there, coordinated misconduct, like a verdict. Ellis slammed his palm onto the table. "This is a coup. She's staging a coup." A strange calm washed through me then. Not triumph, not vindication, just clarity. "If I wanted a coup," I said quietly, "I wouldn't have brought evidence. I would have brought a replacement slate." He froze. The truth of it landed visibly. Patel folded his hands. "Ellis, please step out of the room." No. It wasn't a request. For a moment I thought he might refuse, truly refuse, push the table over, or storm out with a performance designed for later litigation. But something inside him cracked. His face trembled, just barely, before he yanked his chair back and shoved himself toward the door. When it closed behind him, the room exhaled. Patel shifted his gaze to Ramirez. "You as well." She stood slower, her voice came out thin. "I made a mistake." "You made many," he said. When the door clicked shut behind her, Riley finally let her shoulders drop. Patel turned fully to me. "Alexis, how long have you known?" The question hit me harder than I expected. 2 weeks, I said. "Maybe longer if you count the things I ignored." "And you built all this." "I had help," I nodded toward Riley. He absorbed that, nodding slowly. Then he straightened. "We'll begin immediate suspension proceedings. Access revoked within the hour. A formal investigation launched." The investor at the far end spoke for the first time. "Alexis, we'll need your full presentation of evidence, and I want to assure you, we stand with you in this." My throat tightened, but I kept my posture steady. "Understood." Patel closed his folder. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour. Take a moment if you need it." But I didn't move. Because through the glass wall, down the hallway, I could see Ellis on his phone, gesturing wildly, face red, panic cutting sharp lines into his expression. He wasn't giving up. Not yet. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt ready. The hour between the confrontation and the formal board vote felt like standing on a precipice, too high to step back, too dangerous to look down. Riley and I sat in my office, the blinds half closed, the air thick with that faint smell of printer toner and old carpet that always emerged when the HVAC cycled. My pulse hadn't settled, not even close. Through the glass, I could still see Ellis pacing in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. He no longer looked confident. He looked hunted. His gestures were sharp, erratic, one hand slicing the air, the other gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles blanched. Ramirez stood a few feet away from him, her arms crossed over her chest, staring at the floor as though it might open up and swallow her. "They're scrambling," Riley murmured beside me, typing rapidly as she backed up copies of everything onto encrypted drives. "He's probably calling his lawyer, maybe his contact at Medaxis, maybe a PR fixer." "They're dangerous when they're cornered," I said quietly. She didn't disagree. Instead, she sipped the last of her cold coffee and eyed the door. "When they call you back in, don't let them shift the narrative. They're going to try." I let out a slow breath. They always do. The movement in the hallway changed. Ellis stopped pacing. His shoulders dropped slightly as if someone on the other end of the call had given him instructions he didn't like. He rubbed a hand over his face, then looked directly at my office. Our eyes met through the glass. He didn't look away. Riley stepped in front of me, blocking his view. "Don't give him the satisfaction," she said. A soft knock pulled our attention to the doorway. It was Patel. His expression was unreadable but not unfriendly. "Alexis, we're ready." I stood, smoothing my blazer even though my hands felt too stiff to move naturally. Riley squeezed my shoulder, just once, but it steadied me more than she knew. I walked down the hall, each step deliberate, the muted thud of my heels grounding me. When I entered the boardroom again, the energy had changed. This wasn't a group caught off guard anymore. This was a tribunal. Ellis and Ramirez were already seated, flanked by two empty chairs that made the separation feel even larger. Ellis's jaw was tight, but his posture had shifted. He sat straighter, leaning back slightly, like someone had told him to project confidence, not fear. Ramirez looked small, almost folded inward, her tablet clasped to her chest like a shield. Patel cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the preliminary evidence. Before we move to a vote, each party will have the opportunity to make a statement. Alexis, as CEO and primary complainant, you'll begin." I nodded, stepping forward. The polished table reflected a faint, warped version of my face, tired eyes, drawn cheeks, but a steady jaw. I looked at each board member before I spoke. "For the past several weeks," I began, "two individuals on this board have engaged in activities designed to undermine the stability of this company. They accessed proprietary data without authorization. They exported it to an external endpoint associated with a direct competitor. They prepared internal documents for a proposed acquisition that this board never discussed." Ramirez flinched. Ellis didn't move. I continued. "The predictive outcomes model we built, my life's work, was duplicated and transferred. The dataset reflecting years of clinical partnerships was compromised, and these actions were not the result of confusion or miscommunication. They were coordinated." I held up the folder. "Everything I'm stating is validated by logs, metadata, and email correspondence you now have in front of you." Patel nodded. "Thank you." He turned. "Ellis, you may respond." Ellis stood slowly, smoothing the front of his suit jacket with a practiced motion. "This," he said, his voice calm, almost silky, "is a misunderstanding blown into a spectacle. Alexis has always been brilliant but overly protective of the technology, sometimes to the detriment of the company." My fingertips dug lightly into the table, heat crawling up my spine. He continued, "The access Alexis refers to was part of a strategic analysis we were conducting, a potential partnership, and the memo, taken out of context, was a draft scenario, nothing more." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances. I inhaled sharply. "Here it comes." Ellis turned to me, lowering his voice as if appealing to reason. "Alexis, I know you've been under stress. Running a company of this size takes a toll. No one blames you for reacting emotionally." "Stop," I said. The word cut clean through the room. I stepped closer. "You don't get to weaponize my leadership. You don't get to twist my vigilance into hysteria. And you definitely don't get to call me emotional while you commit corporate theft." A few people shifted, uncomfortable, but no one stopped me. I turned to Patel. "The truth is not complicated. Ellis and Ramirez prepared this company for a sale below its fair value, without board approval, using stolen internal data. They acted for their own gain at the expense of every employee, every partner, and every patient whose outcomes rely on our platform. Silence. Then Patel spoke. We've heard enough. He opened the folder in front of him. We are moving to a formal vote on the immediate suspension and removal of Ellis Rochester and Laura Ramirez from the board, pending completion of the full investigation. My breath caught, not relief, not victory, just the weight of the moment settling into my bones. All in favor. Hands rose, not hesitantly, not reluctantly. Unanimously. Ellis sagged back into his chair, the mask finally cracking. Ramirez closed her eyes, as if absorbing the impact that was now irreversible. Patel turned to me with a slow, solemn nod. It's done. But as I watched Ellis's stare harden into something cold and calculating, I felt the truth land like a stone. It wasn't over. Not until the world outside, this boardroom heard what they'd done. Not until every door they tried to open slammed shut. Not until the company was safe again. The fallout began before I even stepped out of the boardroom. Within minutes, security had been notified, system access revoked, and internal alerts triggered across every critical platform. Watching it unfold was surreal, like witnessing a glass tower crack from the inside, each fracture line branching out faster than the last. I stood in the hallway outside the boardroom, leaning lightly against the cool wall as the first wave of consequences rippled through the company. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, humming in that way they always did late in the afternoon, when the building felt half asleep. Employees walked past, unaware that the tectonic plates of their professional world had just shifted. Then I saw it, the moment Ellis realized the revocations had gone live. His phone vibrated once, then again, then again. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the lock screen, and froze. A cascade of notifications lit up, access removed, credentials disabled, accounts locked. His face drained, the color bleeding out until he looked almost translucent under the overhead lights. He jabbed at the screen. "This is a mistake," he muttered under his breath. A fourth alert appeared. Then a fifth. Ramirez checked her own phone, her shoulders curving inward as though the weight of each ping was pulling her down. "Ellis," she whispered, "they've my email, my access." He didn't answer, because in that moment he understood exactly what it meant. The power he had wielded so casually, so smugly, was evaporating in real time. "Ellis," I said softly. He lifted his head. This didn't have to happen this way. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitch. "You think you've won." "I think," I replied, "you're done." The glare he gave me was sharp enough to cut skin. But his fury didn't matter, not compared to what came next. The emergency board meeting reconvened within the hour. This time, the air in the room buzzed with a different energy, focused, urgent. Everyone leaned forward as I presented the timeline, the evidence packet, the metadata trails. Patel asked precise questions. Counsel took meticulous notes. The other board members listened with a mix of anger and disbelief, as though trying to reconcile the colleagues they'd trusted with the criminals they'd just voted out. "We must notify regulators," Counsel said finally. "SEC for governance breaches, HHS for data misuse, depending on what FI was accessed, and all partners with contractual rights to IP notification." I nodded. "I've already drafted communications." "And Medaxis?" one investor asked. "We'll send a cease and desist," Counsel replied, "with the evidence attached." I didn't miss the way Patel's eyebrows lifted. "Attached." Counsel's voice was firm. "They need to understand how deep the exposure goes. They'll distance themselves immediately." He was right. Within hours, Medaxis's legal team sent a curt, carefully worded email stating they had no knowledge of unauthorized access and were launching an internal review. Translation: they were throwing Ellis and Ramirez directly under the bus. By the next morning, whispers had already reached me, recruiters withdrawing inquiries, advisory roles evaporating, industry leaders quietly asking, "Did you see what happened?" LinkedIn updates paused, endorsements suddenly stagnant. Their reputations were collapsing in real time. But the cost, for me, for the company, was only beginning to reveal itself. Because while justice had landed swiftly, exhaustion settled even faster. The adrenaline drained from my body like a plug pulled from a tub, leaving me hollow. My muscles trembled every time I tried to stand. My eyes burned from more than fatigue. And yet, as I watched Ellis and Ramirez escorted out, two figures who once stood beside me at celebration dinners, who once smiled as if we shared a common vision, I realized something quietly devastating. Justice isn't clean. It leaves residue. It leaves bruises. And even when you win, you feel the weight of what almost broke you. For the first time in weeks, the office felt still. Not quiet. There was always the dull hum of ventilation, the distant clatter of keyboards, the faint scent of overbrewed coffee drifting from the kitchen, but still. Like the building itself had exhaled after holding its breath through the storm. In the days after Ellis and Ramirez were removed, I existed in a haze of depositions, document reviews, and back-to-back meetings with regulators. Hours blurred together. I slept on my couch more nights than I slept in my bed. Riley all but moved into the lab with me, her hair always tied up, her hoodie sleeves permanently pushed to her elbows as she walked me through the forensic timeline again and again. We built a narrative so airtight that even the most skeptical investigator couldn't poke a hole through it. The deposition was the hardest. 6 hours at a long conference table, the room smelling faintly of paper and cheap carpet cleaner as Ellis's lawyer tried to twist every detail. He attempted deflection, confusion, even sympathy. But the metadata didn't budge. The logs didn't lie. And by hour 4, Ellis stopped making eye contact completely. His voice shrank, clipped and resigned, as though he had finally understood there was no angle left to exploit. Ramirez barely spoke at all. Afterward, the regulatory filings went out. HHS, the SEC, our hospital partners. The CEO of Kaiser Regional called me directly. "We heard what happened," she said, her tone steady but warmer than I expected. "Your company handled it with integrity. That matters, we're staying." I pressed my palm to my forehead, eyes stinging. Relief felt like a physical sensation, a slow unfurling inside my chest. But recovery wasn't just external. Inside the company, trust had to be rebuilt. I held an all-hands meeting in the atrium, standing under the soft buzz of the track lights, facing my team, my people. I told them the truth, not the sanitized version. I told them what had been taken, what had been risked, and what had been saved. Some faces were shocked, some angry, some quietly devastated. But when I finished, they applauded, not the loud, explosive kind, but a grounded, steady affirmation. A promise by sound. We spent months cleaning up, strengthening protocols, rebuilding morale, interviewing new board candidates who understood the company's mission rather than the politics of power. When we finally closed our $10.4 million Series B, I signed the documents with a steadiness I hadn't felt in a long time. Ellis and Ramirez faded from the industry almost quietly. Last I heard, he was consulting for a mid-tier firm 2 states away, the kind of work people take when they've run out of doors to knock on. Ramirez resurfaced briefly at a small analytics shop, her title modest, her name noticeably absent from the leadership page. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake with my heart pounding, convinced I've missed something, a log entry, a buried file, a shadow in the system. Trauma leaves echoes. It doesn't vanish. It lingers like a faint scent you can't trace. But then I remember that morning in the boardroom, the final vote, the moment the truth landed like a gavel, and I breathe a little easier. Because I survived, because I fought, because I trusted myself even when it felt like no one else did. And if you've stayed with me through all of this, if any part of my story echoed something you've lived through, some betrayal you've had to claw your way out of, then know this, that tiny moment of understanding between us. That's what kept me standing on the nights I couldn't sleep. And for that, truly, thank you.